It's a good day to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's your boy Millsy, back at the hometown community, and we are back for another episode of Millsy Brews, the show where I brew for my version 1.0 deck list of the commander in front of us on my quest to out-brew your favorite Magic channel. Man, Wilds of Eldraine is here on a Wizard's continued quest to bury the world in new Magic cards, and I'm having kind of an odd thought this week in that I love new sets because it gives me a chance to brew new decks, but unfortunately my play group is playing a little bit less and less, so I won't be testing as much on the back end, but I haven't stopped my love from wanting to brew for you guys, to brew for the channel, and so hopefully, even though I'm testing a little bit less, we still get to have some fun on the channel. In the next couple of weeks, we're going to be looking at a ton of new Wilds of Eldraine commanders, as well as reaching back and doing some old ones as well. I've got a lot of fun content planned, but let's start with our first of the two precons we're going to look at for Wilds of Eldraine in Fae Dominion. This is a blue-black fairy tribal deck, and this is a deck that I think was really cool that they made. The last time we saw fairies, of course, in the limelight was in Throne of Eldraine, the first time we went to Eldraine. But Alayla's precon it didn't really stick as a fairies deck. It stuck as a, artifact and enchantress style deck, right? But I am happy to see fairies get another shot. We get to play some of the really cool fairies from Magic's past. We get to play some really great new fairies as well. I do like a couple of the new ones as well as Talion looks pretty cool. And I think we get to play a good mix of the new Tegwyll, which is the commander we're looking at today, and then a little bit of mix of the new Alayla. We can really play into both with this deck, and I think it looks like a ton of fun. But if you're just interested in the deck list, it's going to be down in the description. Please feel free to take it, do what you want with it. That's the goal of Millsy Brews, for you to have fun, enjoy my list, but make it your own. Do what you want with it, or even use it for inspiration. Those are my favorite comments when you guys tell me that you take inspiration from different cards I pulled, and I do the exact same thing. So I love that you guys find that out of that. But let's talk about Tegwyll, Duke of Splendor. We have a 3-mana 2/3 Fairy Noble. Flying and Death Touch. Other fairies you control get +1/+7. Whenever another fairy you control dies, you draw a card and you lose a life. I think this is about what you'd want from a fairy commander, as far as doing a good job at giving you a lot of value. +1/+1 to the rest of our fairies is great. That ability is going to go far. Of course, the more fairies we have. And then getting a draw card and lose a life when one of our fairies die is a great ability, because we're in a tribe that's relying on a ton of creatures and not making a ton of tokens. Spoiler alert, tomorrow we're going to be looking at Alayla, the old Alayla, and actually making a Esper Fairies deck, although it'll still play and have some fun, but we'll see a little bit of difference there in going wide. But I think this deck is still trying to use individual creatures in their effects and things like that, so being able to kind of hopefully replace the creatures that die is a really important thing. Getting down into the mana base with a really blue heavy deck, so we're playing a lot of blue islands over the swamps. I tried my best to add some lands here that I think are going to help us out. The castles from our original time in Eldraine should help us out a good amount. Added the Drowned Catacomb, the Shipwreck Marsh, and the Underground River, just for a little bit of added blue-black fun. Mirrored Landscape comes back over from the precon, and I think it does a really good job. Path of Ancestry and Command Tower, of course, being our classics. I still like the bounce lands, the Ravnica bounce lands in a 2-color deck. I still feel like they're more than worth it, and I think it feels great here, and we're playing enough basics to make things like Sunken Hollow and Drowned Catacomb probably come in on tap most of the time. But, alright, Enchantments we're not playing a ton, and that's just because we're playing the ones that are relevant. Bitter Blossom, of course, is going to get us more fairies. That's going to be pretty great. It's going to help us go a little bit wider. Favorable Winds, I think all of our fairies have flying, so this is going to help us pump up our board. Kindred Discovery just got that reprint in the Enchanting Tales, and that'll help us out on the cost of it a little bit. We're going to choose fairies, and then whenever fairy enter the battlefield or attacks, we draw a card. This is going to help us get through our deck, get into our good things. And then Reconnaissance Mission, whenever one of our creatures deals combat damage to a player, we can draw a card. Again, trying to get cards back into our hands so that we don't just play out all of our creatures and then just drown and having no cards left in our hand. We want to make sure that we're constantly getting new cards back into our hand. As far as artifacts go, I really like the spread here. I think we get a lot of really interesting things. As far as the mana rocks go, Arcane Signet, Commander Sphere, a Decanter, the Signet, Midnight Clock, Misleading Signpost, which we'll talk about in a second, Soul Ring, and the Talisman. Signpost seems kind of interesting. This is a card that says, when it enters the battlefield during declare attacker step, you can reselect which player or permanent target attacking creature is attacking. This is kind of an interesting ability. Of course, it says that they can't attack its own controller or their permanents, obviously, but this could be interesting, right? If someone only attacks us with one creature and we have this signpost in our hand, we could flash it in, save ourselves from that attack. We could take someone's creature and put it at somebody else. I think it's just an interesting effect. But again, I like this for the same reason I like Midnight Clock. It's a mana rock, but it gives us an upside. And Midnight Clock is one of my favorite mana rocks with an upside. After 4 turns on the table, we reshuffle our hand and our graveyard into our deck and draw a fresh 7. It recycles any of the creatures we lost. It gives us a fresh 7. I absolutely love it. As far as our non-mana artifacts, Vanquisher's Banner, giving everyone a flat +1/+1 and drawing a card every time we cast a fairy spell. It's going to help us, again, refill our hand as we're playing more of our actual fairy cards instead of going into the tokens. Same thing with Herald's Horn, making everything 1 mana cheaper, and then going to get us hopefully a fairy card to our hand each turn. And then Coat of Arms, a card that I hope is going to help us end the game, giving everything +1/+1 for each other creature in the battlefield that shares a type with it. I'm hoping this can help us close out the game, especially since most of our fairies are in the air. One's Coat of Arms and 5 or 6 creatures should hopefully help us just hit through for our opponents, and hopefully we can take them out with that. If not, attack very well or block very well, depending on what situation we run into. As far as the instance goes, you're going to notice we're kind of playing around with these a little bit. We got a little bit of removal, but we're also trying to play into Alayla as our secondary commander in her ability that gets us tokens if we cast spells on our opponent's turn. So we're also trying to play some counter spells and interaction that way. Arcane Denial, just a straight up counter spell, counter target spell. Its controller may draw up to 2 cards at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep, and you draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. So we go up a card and counter a pesky spell. Counter spells are important. They're a good part of blue decks, and they just need to be dispatched at the right time. Wait for your opponents to pay a ton of mana for a big effect, and hopefully you can counter it. Blink of an eye to potentially bring something back to its owner's hand. And if we can kick it, we can draw a card. I think bounce effects are important, especially in blue, because they're so darn good at it. I think Blink of Eye, you just got to make sure you find the right situation to use them. Don't just bounce something for the sake of bouncing something. Wait for the right time. Break up a combo. Throw someone's attack off. And try your best to find the right situation to do it. Brainstorm, just a little bit of draw, and it's very good at it. Consider, again, same thing, very good at it. Counterspell, here's the OG Counterspell. Happy to play it, and I believe should be pretty cheap. It's got a ton of reprints. Drawn in the Lock from our first time in Eldraine. A very well-known card, so you choose one. You can either counter target spell with mana value less than the number of cards in its controller's graveyard, or destroy target creature with mana value less than or equal to the number of cards in that controller's graveyard. This can be fun because it can be counter spell or removal, and I think that makes it really good. Infernal Grasp for some removal, Opt for some draw. Perplexing Test is kind of interesting. We can return all creature tokens to their owner's hands, or non-token creatures to their owner's hands. This can help us host potentially any of the decks that we might come across. Pongfi and Rapid Hybrid do definitely have a pretty high cost for each of them, almost $5 at the time of this recording, but they're both probably some of the best single target removal spells for destroying that we have access to. Both 1 mana, we give the opponent a 3/3, but again, all of our creatures in the air, we don't care about that 3/3, and hopefully we can block them. Reality Shift is probably my favorite single target removal in this deck. Exiling a creature. Again, you let the opponent manifest the top card of their library, but again, you get rid of that creature completely, and that's pretty great. You can also play things like Resculpt if you want to, but I think I wanted to diversify the removal a little bit, and again, I really like Reality Shift. Repulse, return to our creature to its owner's hand if we draw a card. This is right from the precon. I thought it did a pretty good job. Snap, return to our creature to its owner's hand, untap up to 2 lands. Again, here we go. This is from the precon as well, just bouncing things and getting a benefit. But again, if we have a Layla, our secondary commander, out, we get a token for it. Spell Stutter, It's an interesting new counter spell. Counter target spell its opponent plays 2 plus an additional 1 for each fairy you control, which could potentially be a lot of mana. So that's pretty cool. And then theoretical duplication says whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under opponent's control, create a token that's a copy of it. This is kind of cool because depending on what your opponents are playing, we can kind of keep our own copy of it. Hopefully we can take advantage of it. As far as our sorceries, Distant Melody can draw us a card for each permanent we control of that creature type. Feed the Swarm can hit a creature or enchantment. It's pretty classic black removal, I feel like, at this point, and we'll happily play it. Kindred Dominance came in the deck, which is great. Choose creature type, destroy all creatures that aren't that type. That's going to become really helpful because I doubt that most people are playing fairies. So that's going to be very helpful. Notorious Throng is a rogue tribal sorcery spell, and this is going to be good because a lot of our fairies are rogues, but it says create X1/1 black fairy rogue creature tokens with flying, where X is the damage dealt to your opponents this turn. But it says if you cast it with prowl cost, you take an extra turn after this one. Well, if we can hit in with a lot of our fairies that are also rogues, we make a bunch of 1/1s, take an extra turn, and hopefully we can get in that combat as well. And then Stolen by the Fae. This card got released our first time around in Eldraine. It says return target creature with mana value X to its owner's hand, and we make 1/1 fairy creature tokens with flying. So we can hopefully return something big back, make some tokens, and again go wide as well. And now we get into our bunch of fairies. I'll give you another stopping point. If you don't want to hear me go through one by one all of the fairies, you can just check out that deck list down below. Let me know what you think. But if you want to hear it, let's rock through them. Alayla, Cunning Conqueror, is our secondary commander in the deck, and I think she does a really good job. A 2/4 for 4 with flying. Whenever you cast your first spell during each opponent's turn, we make a fairy rogue token with flying. And then whenever one of our fairies we control deal damage to a player, go target creature that player controls. This is pretty cool because not only are we getting tokens, we can force our opponents to attack other people with the big creatures we don't really want to deal with. I like it. I think I just like Tegwyll just that little bit more, getting the buff. And I think that could be important, but I think Alayla is also a very good choice for this deck, and you would easily be able to probably switch them out. I don't think the deck would run any worse if you went and switched them, and I think that's what could make this deck fun, seeing what happens if you change your commander out and the kind of experiences that you get. Archmage of Echoes, this is, I believe, a new card in the deck. Flying Ward 2, whenever you cast a fairy or wizard permanent spell, copy it. That's pretty cool because we're not playing a ton of legendary fairies. I mean, we are playing a few, but we really aren't. So this should get us a good amount of copies. Brazen Borrower gets its reprint in the commander in the precon, and this is probably one of the most popular cards from our original time in Eldraine. The adventure can return a non-land permanent to its owner's hand. It comes in with flying. It can only block creatures with flying, but it's a great attacker. I like Brazen Borrower. It's a great card, and I think it fits what we're trying to do with our fairies pretty well. Fairy Artisan. Whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, we can create a token that's copied of it, except it's an artifact and it's others types, and then we exile all their tokens created with Fairy Artisan. So they put in a creature. We make a copy of it, and we lose the previous one we made a copy of. This is fun, and again, it's a interesting card, and it's going to help us hopefully take advantage of the things that our opponents are playing. Fairy Bladecrafter, I believe, is new. Flying, whenever one of our fairies you control deal combat damage to a player, we put a counter on it. And when it dies, each opponent loses X life, and we gain X, where X is its power. Again, great ability, 3 mana, 2/2 flyer, and it's hopefully going to get big quickly as we can hit multiple people and get this trigger multiple times. Fairy Seer, just a scry 2 when it comes in. It's a 1/1. Again, it's a great body, and it can go into our kindred discovery type effects to get us to draw. Sometimes we want some fairies that come down for cheap, even to chump block if need be. Glendolenda Archmage gets a reprint in the deck, which is great because it's one of the more popular fairies. Flying, 1 blue, sack it to counter target non-creature spell, and then persist. So the cool part is, if it didn't persist already, 1 blue can sack it to counter a spell and bring it back with that -1/-1 token, and then you can do it again. So this is great because we get a little bit of way to affect what our opponents are doing. Gunalender Liege, a 4-mana fairy knight with flying that can buff blue and black creatures. So for every creature that's both, they get +2/+2. That's great because, again, we have a couple creatures in our deck that are actually both. Our commander and some of our other cards are both. So they'll get that benefit. Otherwise, every fairy in our deck should get at least 1 +1/+1 from this card. Hypnotic Sprite, counter target spell with mana value 3 or less on the adventure is interesting, but it's just a 2 mana 2/1 with flying on the regular side. Again, I think it's still good enough to play, and again, here's another callback to the original Eldraine release. Likeness Litter, this is a new card from the set. 2 mana 1/1 flyer, draw a card, then discard on the tap, and then X becomes a copy of target creature card in your graveyard with mana value X, except it has flying and this ability activated on a sorcery. I like this because it can turn into a copy of another good fairy in our graveyard if need be. And then we can always do it again, and it's not till end of turn, it just becomes a copy of it. So I like Likeness Looter. Again, it has interesting tap ability, and then if we have enough mana, we can turn it into something fun. Malleable Imposter, I believe, is another new card. You may have it come in as a copy of a target creature an opponent controls, except it's a fairy, shapeshifter, in addition to its other types, and it has flying. This is pretty cool. It has flash. Could potentially get in at the right time, get the right creature, get the right effect. I like it. And again, here's an example of another really cool card that I think they added for the deck. Niddling Nuisance, another new fairy. Whenever one of our fairies you control deal combat damage to a player, that player creates a 4/2 red pirate creature token with this creature can't block, and it's goaded for the rest of the game. This is cool because we're going to give people things they have to attack each other with, and it can never block, which I doubt will matter because all of our creatures are going to be flying in the air. Again, if that player is the last player left, then of course the pirates will be able to attack us eventually, but again, our hope is that we can have the pirates kind of spread around and deal damage to other people as we're doing what we're doing. Night Veil Sprite, whenever it attacks, we surveil 1. So look at the top card. It can either go into your graveyard or back on top. Kind of interesting ability. Again, just a 2 mana 1/2. It is a rogue, so that helps out with some of those sub synergies. Nimrus Una's Trickster. I believe this is another new card, if I recall correctly. Flash flying. Whenever you cast your first spell during each opponent's turn, look at the top 2 cards of your library. Put one into your hand and the other into your graveyard. Again, another way to take advantage of this playing spell during our opponent's turns if we're using a Layla. Now that I think about this, Nimrus may be a reprint, but either way, interesting card. Another one of another legendary option for the deck if you want to do that. Obira Dreaming Duelist is another fun one, and this is one that I think fits more into our Layla deck that we're going to do tomorrow instead of today. But Obira says flash flying. Whenever another fairy enters battlefield under your control, each opponent loses a life. Well, if we can make tokens or we can play lots of fairies, hopefully we can knock our opponents down a few pegs with this one, and I like this card a lot. Una's Black card, another classic fairy. Whenever it says each of the rogue you control enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. Again, most of our fairies in the deck, I think we have a good amount of them that are rogues. They're going to come in with extra counters. And then whenever a creature we control with a counter deals damage to a player, that player discards a card. So that's kind of cool. That helps us turn some of our stuff into good value. Una, Queen of the Fae, another one of the most popular fairy commanders, gets a reprint in the deck as well. Flying. And for X in the blue or black, we choose a color. That opponent exiles the top of that many cards of their library for each card of the chosen color exile. This way we make that fairy rogue blue and black token with flying. I love Una. It's a fun card, and I think it fits the deck really well. And it's a great blocker, it's a great attacker, but again, that ability is just a ton of fun. And the more mana you can put into it, the harder it is for your opponents to watch them just exile cards off the top of their library. Pestermite, flash and flying. When it enters the battlefield, you can tap or untap target permanent. This is kind of cool. Again, plays into this playing things on our opponent's turns, but could also just tap down an important creature if we needed to. Quickling. When it enters the battlefield, sacrifice it unless you return another creature you control to its owner's hand. That's not going to be a problem. I'm sure we're going to have plenty of fairies or tokens laying around that we can return back. But again, just a 2/2 with flying. Rankle, probably one of my favorite fairies they've ever released, especially in the original Eldraine. I just love this card. It's a fun card, and it tends to hurt your opponents because whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you can choose any number of the following effects. Each player discards a card. Each player loses a card and draws a card, or loses life and draws a card, and each player sacrifices a creature. Just 3 really fun effects, and depending on what position you're in the game, it can come into a big advantage. You can trade Rankle for somebody's Voltron commander, worst case scenario. You can have people discard cards. Again, I like Rankle. It has fun effects. Rankle actually got its own sorcery in the new set, Wilds of Eldraine. I didn't put it in the deck, but again, I like the callback to Rankle. Sign of Una. Other fairies get +1/+1, and other fairies have Shroud. Again, a great card can protect our fairies, hopefully, from our opponent's removal. Sleep Cursed Fairy is like the one in the deck that I'm the least sure of, but it's a new card and I want to show it off. Flying Ward to an enters battlefield tap with 3 stun counters, so if it would become untapped, you remove a stun counter instead, and 2 mana to untap it. It's a 1 mana 3/3. I feel like it's worth it, hopefully. If we have the extra mana, we can get rid of those counters. And then it's a 3/3 that we can use. Sword of Temptation, when it comes in, we gain control of target creature for as long as it remains on the battlefield. Sword of Temptation is fun to take people's commanders with. Otherwise, we just take some important creatures and use them for ourselves. Spellscorn Coven, a new adventure fairy. The adventure says return target spell to its owner's hand. So instead of actually countering a spell, we just put it back in their hand. It has flying whenever it enters the battlefield. Each opponent discards a card. Again, it's an uncommon. I think it's a fun card. I'm excited to see what it could do in a commander game. Spellstarter Sprite. Whenever it enters the battlefield, counter target spell with mana value X or less, or X is the number of fairies you control. This could be really good depending on when you play it to take out one of your opponent's really important spells. Talion's Messenger, new card from the set. Whenever we attack with a little more fairies, we draw a card and then discard. When you discard a card this way, you put a counter on a target fairy you control. So again, this is a great way to kind of build up a specific fairy we want to. And then we have Talion himself from the main set, 4 mana 3/4. As long as it says when it enters the battlefield, we choose a number between 1 and 10. Whenever an opponent casts a spell with that mana value, power, or toughness, that player loses 2 life and we draw a card. Again, a fun creature, probably a fun commander in its own right, but I think it feels really good here in a deck that cares about fairies. This is going to be a great fairy and it's going to give us a lot of value. Vendilion Click, another classic fairy choice. When it enters the battlefield, we look at target player's hand. You may choose a non-land card from it. If you do, that player reveals it, puts it at the bottom of their library, and then draws a card. So we could potentially take something from somebody's hand and put it on the bottom, which is pretty cool. Bonus points if you can snag someone's commander that they put back in their hand. But again, if you really want to see what somebody's doing, you can get in touch with their hand and see what they're doing. And then it's just a 3/1 that has flying, so that's great as well. And then Widwin, the Biting Gale, flash flying, and we could pay 2 mana, blue and a black, pay a life, and bring it back to our hand. This does work with Obira, right? If we had enough mana, we could keep playing it every turn, keep nuking our opponents down for the life. But I don't know, I did my best to kind of put together a good subsection of fairies. I mean, this isn't a tribe I've played a ton with, so at the end of the day, I'm going based off the precon and some of the fairies that I know very well. But let me know what you guys think down in the description, in the comments of blue-black fairies. Again, I love this archetype. I love they brought it back, and Tegwyll seems like a great commander for it. If you're interested, the precon is really good. I added some cards to the deck, but I think the precon does look pretty good. It has some great reprints, Brazen Borrower, and Una and things like that. It has some great lands as well in it. I've just did my best to kind of give it a little bit of juice. But let me know anything down in the comments. Like I said, we'll be covering Layla Esper Fairies tomorrow and playing a little bit more into the old Layla. But I want to see what we can do with some new fairies. But that is all I have for you guys, and I will catch you guys next time.